Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo. As everybody gets situated here, I'd like to ask Vice President Scott Hinshaw to come to the podium to offer a reflection and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Scott.
Afternoon, Rotarians. So this last Saturday was the first day of fall, so I found this related reflection. The Wisdom of Fall by Julia McGrath. Fall reminds us to celebrate things. Fall reminds us that we are part of nature. Fall reminds us of the fleeting nature of all things. Fall reminds us to slow down. Fall reminds us to have trust and hope. Fall reminds us to be prepared. Fall reminds us to let go. After the big celebration of colors, the trees let go of their leaves because they are no longer needed. Fall reminds us that we all need to let go at times in order to thrive and to grow. We might need to let go of critical or harmful beliefs about ourselves or others that are more story than reality. We may realize that we have outgrown certain relationships, jobs, habits, or priorities we once felt that we needed. Even though letting go can be scary, it's a necessary part of life. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Scott. As we begin the meeting today, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Equitable Advisors as this month's sponsor and Rotarian Jason Harris. So Jason, thank you very much. I know the answer to this one, but does anyone have any guests? And if so, please come to the floor mic to introduce them.
President Travis. Very pleased to introduce Wendy Spurl. She's the president of Adopt America Network. And Dan Silvers, he's a high client executive as well as the board chair for Adopt America Network.
Excellent. Welcome to both of you.
Hello, President Travis and Rotary. I'm excited to bring with me Customer Care Manager Jessica Rita at TARDA. Jessica has attended one of the social events with Rotaract and is looking at getting more involved and has actually played a key role in the community with the Lucas County Board of DD for several years, and now she's working with TARDA, so happy to have her here.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Travis and Rotary. I'm a little bit shorter. I'm excited today to bring my guest, Marcia Hill. Marcia is the Executive Director of Families for Fitness, Inc., which provides fitness and nutrition programming for students, for kids of really all ages, and both in school, during school, and after school. So I'm just excited that she's here with me to be part of Rotary today.
That's fantastic. Welcome.
Good afternoon, President Travis and fellow Rotarians. It's my honor to introduce you to two guests today. First is Jamil Burkett from Burkett Restaurant Equipment and Supply, and Lacey DeBerry behind him, who's new to Toledo for about a little over a year, from the city of Toledo, and he's the director of DE&I.
Excellent. Welcome to you both.
Please.
Glad you're both here.
Hi, President Travis and fellow Rotarians. I'd like to introduce Ken Wines. He is the Director of Membership at the Sylvania Chamber of Commerce, and he's also a Sylvania Rotarian.
Excellent. Welcome. I appreciate everybody being here today. Raina Dawson, would you please come to the podium, to the floor mic? I'm sorry. Floor mic. I don't make the rules, I just read the script.
And I am graciously following the rules. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. My name is Raina Dawson, and this is Karen Stramel. I should know how to pronounce your last name. I'm so sorry. I'm the chairperson for the Peace Committee this year, and Karen is the vice chair of Peace Committee this year. Our slogan for the year is peace in action. We are going to get some work done. So I'm super excited for the people that affirmatively chose to be on the Peace Committee this year. Our first project is to fill a dress clothes closet for Mount Nebo. So everyone, please keep that in mind. I hear all the time that people need to go to work, but people need clothes to go to work, okay? So please, if you could donate the clothes that you kind of gained a little weight in during COVID, freshly cleaned, and bring that to the meetings, and we will get that done and get that taken care of and get that to the community where it is definitely needed. I got the idea from the past chair, Mr. Kurt Church. Thank you so very much for being so gracious and teaching me the ropes. I look forward to serving with you all, and this is going to be an excellent year. By the way, this is a slight plug. I'm sorry for going off script. I have a driver's license reinstatement clinic this coming Thursday. If you are a licensed attorney and you can give me 2 hours of your time, I need it. You do not need to be a criminal lawyer, okay? I have a video, a script, and a play-by-play. Please send me an email. Thank you so very much.
Thanks to both of you. I really appreciate it. So coming up on October 3rd is our annual Zoo Day with the students from Glendale Fieldbox School. We'll be joining with our Interact students from St. Francis. That QR code there is to sign up if you can help us. But as everybody who's ever done it knows, Zoo Day is a lot of fun. Getting to be with the kids, going around the zoo. So definitely volunteer to help out. Again, that's on October 3rd, 9 to 1 p.m. President-elect Kevin Mullen, would you please come to the podium to introduce new member Bethany Hefflinger.
President Travis, fellow Rotarians, it is my pleasure to welcome Bethany Hefflinger to Toledo Rotary, the newest member of this incredible club. Bethany will surely have an impact right away if she hasn't already gotten a jump start on that. Bethany, who swears she is in her 20s, is a business development executive for Winhouse, an innovation and solutions firm here in Toledo. On the company website, it says, quote, "We bring enthusiastic energy to every interaction. We don't wait for opportunities. We create them through curiosity and collaboration." That accurately sums up every interaction I've had with Bethany thus far. A graduate of Bowling Green State University, I won't hold that against her, Bethany and her husband Austin, along with their beloved Bernese mountain dog, is it Maya? Adorable, have planted roots in peaceful countryside just outside of BG. She and her husband are very adventurous. They enjoy skiing, snowmobiling, traveling, and spending time at their lake house with loved ones, although somehow I haven't received my invite yet. Perhaps it's just lost in the mail. Oh, season's over. Yeah, well done. Next year. All right, fingers crossed. The motto that guides her personal and professional life is, quote, "leading with grace and grit." I'm not surprised at all to see her excitement for adding service above self and the Rotary four-way test to that as well. She's incredibly active in the community and also serves as the executive director of the American Advertising Federation of Toledo, an incredible addition to our club and our community. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Bethany Hefflinger.
Thank you, Kevin. Welcome, Bethany. Haas Joseph, are you here today? Maybe. I want to send congratulations out to Haas. He is awarded the Emerging Leader Award from the University of Toledo College of Law. So congratulations to Haas. Something we want to start doing more often, and Fred, you're out there. This one's for you, buddy. The board met last week, and Fred and I had coffee about a month and a half ago or so. And, you know, we talked a lot about transparency, but Fred and I spoke, and he said, you know, I know you guys have board meetings, but we don't really hear a lot about them. So without going into too many details and making this a long, drawn-out thing, we kind of want to just hit on a few highlights of what's being discussed at the board, some things that are coming up, and just give a little bit of insight, just so the club has a better feeling for what leadership is up to, so that you know the right questions to ask. So At last Thursday meeting, it probably went really well because I was not there. But right, Kevin ran it. I'm told he did an okay job. I want to start with membership. I want to congratulate this club. Membership is rolling, and it's all based on the enthusiasm of all of you. In September alone, we've added 12 new members, and we have gone since the beginning of July. We had 2 corporate memberships. We are now at 12. Yeah. We currently stand at 296 Rotarians in this club. That is up dramatically from even 3 months ago. So again, this is all of your efforts and all the enthusiasm that all of you are bringing to the club. So thank you. Keep it up. Don't slow down. Let's keep the train going. Next, we've had a lot of talks already this year about the transformational projects. I wanted to give you a quick update that on October the 5th, the executive leadership from both the board and from the trustees are all meeting together to discuss the topic of transformational projects, so that as we bring more information back to the club, you know that you're hearing it from across both the board and the foundation. We want to make sure we're all lockstep on this and that there's not 2 narratives, there's not 2 separate ideas. So that meeting will be October 5th. We will come back to you after that with some information and any updates that we have from that conversation. Topic of international services. In an effort to start planning for large global grant partnerships, we will be sending a contingent of members to Uniendo this January in Honduras to represent our club. For those of you who are not familiar with Uniendo, it is a large project fair where local clubs from throughout Central America come together and try and create partnerships with clubs like our own to accomplish large-scale projects so that we can actually take advantage of Rotary International matching funds, things like that. So we want to get that process kicked off again. It's been a few years since we've really been able to really take part in some global grants, so we want to get that part kicked off again as well. In tandem with that, the Foundation Advisory Committee is meeting this Friday at 8 a.m. here at Glass City Center. The Foundation Advisory Committee, for those who don't know, is the committee that actually meets to review all of the grant requests that have been forwarded on by the individual committees. So this is an opportunity to actually see and have a say in where some of the dollars of this club go for projects. So if you watch this club and see the amount of impact we have in the community and you want to know where it's going and have your own impact and own say, 8 a.m. Friday at Foundation Advisory Committee. Anyone can join that committee. It is not limited. So if you have an interest, you may join it and you may come to that meeting. So again, that's Friday at 8 a.m. And finally, we will be sponsoring as a club and participating in the Read for Literacy Spelling Bee on October 19th and are looking for individuals to join our team. So look for more information to come on that, but that should be a fun and impactful event. So that is kind of just a rundown of what's going on up at the board. Next up, I would like to ask Mari Davies to please come to the podium and introduce today's guest speaker, Rita Soronen.
She's even shorter than I, so I'm honored to introduce our guest who has been so generous with her time to travel to Toledo from Columbus to deliver an impassioned message about our nation's children in foster care system and the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption Foundation's role in serving these compromised and vulnerable children. Her credentials and accomplishments are too many to recite here, lest I take valuable time from her presentation. But some highlights include leading the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, a national nonprofit public charity since 2001, and the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption Canada since 2004. Ms. Soronen works to find forever families for the more than 140,000 waiting children in North America's foster care systems. She's earned national recognition as a premier child welfare advocate, testifying before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Caucus for Foster Youth, and numerous congressional briefings on the importance of foster care and adoption. Fellow Toledo Rotarian Judy Leb has worked extensively with Rita in her own long path of advocating for these children, and enthusiastically recommended we invite Rita to provide an overview with current trends in infant, international, and foster care adoption, with a focus on the status of foster care adoption and the work of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption in response. Please join me in a warm Rotary welcome from Ms. Rita Soronen.
Well, I am shorter, significantly. Yikes. You know what? I think I'm just gonna, okay.
We'll just bend it once.
Oh,
There we go.
perfect, perfect. All right, you can hear me okay, I trust, thank you. I am delighted to be here. Thank you, President Travis, thank you, Mary, and thank you to Judy for not being here. I worked with Judy a number of years ago when I ran CASA programs across the state of Ohio, so delighted that she's still doing the work that she does. Thank you for your service and for all that you do and for the reputation that you have among Rotaries across the nation. You are doing incredible work, and so I know I'm here with a warm audience on this conversation about foster care, adoption, international, and local. You know, a little bit about us first. This is our founder here, Dave Thomas. Because you're from Ohio, I don't have to tell you much about Dave Thomas, but he was adopted, and he started the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption in 1992. And wanted to focus very specifically on the foster care adoption, because in 1992 it was not a robust conversation. If you had gone out on Monroe Street in 1992 and just said the word adoption, most people would think infant adoption, and maybe even international infant adoption. That was sort of the common thought about adoption then. And he realized, because he was adopted, but had an odd circumstance in growing up in his family. His adoptive mother passed away when he was very young. His father was an itinerant worker moving from place to place, and he was raised by his grandmother, Minnie. Well, that kind of describes a lot of our youth in foster care right now. So he very uniquely understood, even though he was adopted as an infant, this notion that we had to elevate the conversation about children in the United States and Canada, about what they are experiencing, how we break barriers, how we make sure that they have the right to a family and a home. And this thought and this quote from him is really underscores everything that we do. And I know a lot of what you do as well, that these children are not someone else's responsibility. They are our responsibility. And so we have a very simple mission and vision. He liked it that way, I think, right? Do one thing and do it well. Make square hamburgers and Frosties and do it well, and you'll continue to have a great business. And that business model works. And so we did the same thing when he created the foundation. One singular mission: dramatically increase the adoptions of children who have been waiting the longest in North America's foster care systems, under the vision that every child, not just the youngest, not just the prettiest, not just the ones that sell themselves very well because that's who they are, but the quiet ones, the lost ones, the fallen through the crack ones, that every child deserves a permanent home and a lovely and a permanent home and a loving family. And underneath that is that we believe that every child is adoptable, no matter their journey, no matter who they are, no matter how they identify themselves, no matter what community they're from, every child is adoptable. And so we'll start a little bit globally and talk about the state of adoption across the world right now and in the United States. But you know this sort of intuitively, but I think it's worth talking about, that the kinds of adoptions that there are between domestic and international or intercountry. And domestic, they're either public or private adoptions. The public agency here, Lucas County Children's Services, or private agencies like Adopt America Network, right? And they can help with, or the courts, depending on the kind of adoption, with these kind of domestic adoptions. Infant adoption, step-parent adoption, kinship or relative adoption. Did you know right now, today, there are about 2.6 million grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. They are full-time in charge of those children, and a significant percentage of those go on to adopt them as their own. So a lot of things are changing in this country, and we want children to be with family if at all possible. But we have to figure out how to support those grandparents when in their retirement they really hadn't thought about taking care of perhaps a sibling group of 3 whose parents are substance exposed and unable to care for them. And then there's foster care adoption, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and adult adoption. 21-year-olds, 23-year-olds can be adopted. And then there's intercountry adoption. But if we look globally right now, the estimate is that there are about 140 million children who are at risk. This is globally, US and across the world. About 140 million children who are at risk of becoming legal orphans. And of those right now, about 15 million are technically orphans because they have lost both of their parents. And whether they lost them because of war or famine or substance abuse or other kinds of abuse, however they lost those parents, 15 million children across the world is not an insignificant number, and there are things that we can do to address that number. And we think about those barriers. Well, what keeps those children being orphans? And there's so many complex layers to what happens to a child who becomes an orphan, right? First, just that trauma of whatever they're experiencing, whether globally it's war or famine or poverty or all of those things that we think about every day, that trauma of survival, of just taking care of other siblings perhaps, whatever it is. And then compounded by the grief and the loss and just the sense of trauma that they've experienced. So even infants who are adopted into healthy, thriving households at some point carry this sense of loss and grief. Who am I, and why was I adopted, and why did this happen to me? So those are all commingled into this issue of why aren't all these children taken care of? Because we have very complex government systems. We have very complex layers of what happens to these children. And the solutions themselves can appear overwhelming if you decide, okay, I've heard this, I want to step forward and figure out how to fix this circumstance. There's financial requirements. You know, what's the cost of adopting? Internationally, it can go anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 to $60,000 just to adopt a child internationally. Domestically, an infant can cost up to $30,000. Again, a significant financial cost to adopt, never mind the cost to raise a child. There are complex legal, medical, mental health needs with these children. The simple act of experiencing the multiple layers of trauma that they have can manifest in other kinds of outcomes for these children. There's a gauge that clinicians use. It's called ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. And there's a list, and this tends to be mostly US-based because it's a list of what are the adverse experiences that a child has in their life. Is it the divorce of their family? Is it domestic violence? Is it substance abuse or alcoholism? Is it, you know, all of those things that can go on in a family, and many of us have experienced in our families, have an impact on a child growing up and can have an impact on a child's health in the future. Everything from heart disease to depression to other things. And so recognizing those adverse childhood experiences is first critical. But do you have the resources to address them? Can you quickly find access to resources when these children present evidence of need of mental health or extreme physical health needs? There's just a lack of knowledge. Where do I go? How do I do this? Who's going to help me? If you go on to Google and just type in international adoption or type in domestic infant adoption, you're going to be met with literally hundreds and hundreds of organizations. How do you know this one is safe? This one is ethical? This one has the right information? So that immense amount of knowledge can be almost overwhelming, and so you back up and say, I don't know if I can even begin to do this. And then that whole interstate, intercountry barriers that we'll talk about in a second. So here are the trends. Thought it'd be good to look at, and these are the most recent numbers that we could get from 2021. These numbers are always a little hard to gather. They come from various sources. The international adoptions come from the State Department. The public adoptions come from the Department of Health and Human Services, the Children's Bureau in DC. But all of that has reporting in, and the numbers are only as good as the folks that are reporting in. But if we look at just domestic adoption trends, for example, in 2019, 115,000 adoptions were finalized. 115,000 children went to permanent families. And that's not quite, but almost evenly split between private domestic adoption. Again, that would be infant or step-parent, those kind of private domestic adoptions, and public foster care adoptions out of Lucas County Children's Services, for example. But take that down to 2021, and it went down 95,800 domestic adoptions. So a 20% decrease in private domestic and a 18% decrease in public. Now we can guess that COVID had a profound impact on that, right? Everybody backed up and said, I couldn't begin to bring a child into my home. And yet there were lots of adoptions that were in process at that point, but the courts closed down. And so even when someone was ready to continue to step forward, until the courts opened up virtually, we had a lot of kids in line waiting to finalize those adoptions. So those numbers went down. But issues of cost. We're in COVID, we're in tough economies. Issues of cost become maybe more paramount than they were before. Don't know if we're moving into a recession. Don't know what's happening. My business is having some challenges. I don't know that I can afford not only to implement an adoption, but the cost of raising this child. And so those were kind of the reasons for the decline. But when you look internationally as well, wow, significant. In 2004, that was the peak of international intercountry adoptions, almost 23,000 adoptions in 2004. Fast forward to 2022, 1,517 adoptions. Steep decline. But we know those reasons for that decline. Some of it is very much a movement toward children deserve to stay in their home base. Right? Let's figure out ways to help these communities thrive. Let's figure out ways to support families to keep children in these communities rather than bring them over to the United States. So that's one thing. But there were instances of profound graft and corruption that closed borders in many countries. Remember the China one-child policy? For a long time, that essentially closed the border of adoption out of China, which was one of the largest sending countries in the world. So issues and the Hague Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Children really tightened up protocols to make it safer for children and to encourage keeping children in their home country. So a significant decline. It's not that the adoptions don't happen. It's not that if you're interested in adopting internationally, you can't make a go of it, but it's going to be a lot more difficult than it was a couple of decades ago. And so every 5 years at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, we engage Harris Poll to do a national scan. We do it in both the United States and Canada, but I'm just going to talk about the United States today. A scan of Americans' attitudes. Now, not facts, but attitudes. What are your attitudes about foster care, about adoption, all kinds of adoptions, and of course about foster care adoption? Because until we address what may be myths and misperceptions that people hold about families, about the process, about the children in foster care, then we're not going to make sure that we've got people stepping forward to help solve this issue. I will tell you, for example, here are a couple of misperceptions that we know from research that people have specifically about children in the foster care system. They believe that a majority of Americans, it's just 51%, but it's still a majority of Americans believe that a child is in foster care because they've done something wrong, because they're a juvenile delinquent, when nothing could be farther from the truth. They're in care because they've been abused, neglected, abandoned, and they're there through no fault of their own. But because we may see from older youth in foster care acting out behaviors as a result of trauma, as a result of multiple placements, you may see bad news about, and they always identify when it's bad news about a child, if he's adopted, the news will always say, adopted child of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They never say biological child of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, as if that's the reason that something bad happened. And so we want to address those myths and misperception and help them understand who these children are, who these families are, what the system is, and how they can jump into it. So just some top-line numbers. What we found in this last one we did in November of 2021, it was a survey of more than 1,400 Americans and a similar number in Canada, and then weighted for the population of the United States with an over-representation of Hispanic and Black Americans. About 1 in 10 adults are adopted, and it's tough to see this maybe, but from 2007 to 2012, you can see that shift. Again, I think because we did this in November of 2021, we're getting some COVID results mixed in here. But when we asked, were you adopted as a child? Yes, about 1 in 10 or 8%. What was your adoption? Were you infant, domestic infant? 63% of those people that said they were adopted, 63% said they were adopted as an infant. 13% said they were adopted from foster care, and 4% they were adopted internationally. 7 to 12% of Americans have said they have adopted, and we did 2 categories. Did you respond that you've ever adopted, but you don't currently have children in your household? So these may be older Americans and children have left the household. And then, do you currently have children in your household? So 7% of all respondents, whether or not they have children in their household, said yes, they have adopted. And 12% who just have children in their household have adopted. And what we see is an increase in all of those kinds of adoptions. 41%, or I'm sorry, a decrease in domestic infant, 41% from 2007 to 2021, a 3% decrease in domestic infant. But foster care, a significant increase in foster care adoption, plus 38%, 13% said they had adopted from foster care. We hope that's because all of us, Adopt America Network and all of us are doing a much better job talking about children in this country who are waiting to be adopted. And then inter-country adoption still had an increase, at least from this review. 37% have considered adoption, and this is the important point for us. How do you move people from considering to action? If you've thought about it, we know it takes 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times to hear about it, to engage with something, to get more information. It takes a lot of work in order to say, I'm going to move from thinking about adopting to actually adopting. But 37% of Americans have considered adopting, which was significant because it was as high an increase as we've seen since we've been doing this survey. And those that were thinking about adopting, about 70% were thinking about adopting an infant domestically, which was an increase of 8%. About 82% were thinking about adopting from foster care, which was at 8%. And about 52% were thinking about adopting internationally. So it's a good mix of all of the kinds of adoption that people are thinking about doing. So if we drill down a little bit, because we are the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption and we do focus on foster care, just a little bit about the issues about foster care and foster care adoption. And one of the questions we asked is, why would you adopt from foster care? Not why did you, but why would you? So this covered everyone. If you were thinking about adopting from foster care, why would you do it? And the #1 response was because I want to help a child in need. And that's balanced against someone, when we ask, why are you thinking about adopting an infant? That's because they want to have an infant in their household. It's very personal. The other one is very altruistic. So we know folks that go into this field of foster care adoption really do care about what's happening to children. 59% are pretty much aware of what the need is. 21% are motivated by their faith. There's an incredible faith movement across the country about stepping up and helping and adopting children. 17% had a friend or a close family member who adopted, and so they know a little bit about it. They see that it's doable because I have a friend or family member that did it. 16% actually specifically know a child in need. 15% said they can't have biological children, and 13% actually had a personal experience with the foster care system, so it's motivating them to do more. So here are the numbers in the United States. And this is just the United States, it's not Canada for purposes of today's conversation. Today, as we're sitting here, there are about 390,000 children in foster care who have moved out of their home. They're in some kind of substitute care. Now, it may be a kinship relationship, it may be a stranger relationship, it may be a trained foster parent, but 390,000 children are in this indeterminate state. Will I go home? Will I stay in foster care until I turn 18? Will I be freed for adoption, and will I turn and will I then have to hopefully have someone step forward and claim me as their child? And make no mistake, we believe that children deserve to stay in their family of origin, that we need to do a much better job in this country of supporting families who have issues of poverty that may drive into what we now call neglect in the foster care system, and their children are removed, when if we could provide different kinds of support for these families, they could keep their children there. We believe that children deserve to stay in their community of origin because that's their identity. But for these children, it's the courts and the social service agencies that make these determinations. And so for 113,000, more than 113,000 children, the courts have decided, after a significant period of time of going through hearings and activities on the child's behalf and hopefully support services for parents to make this home safe, for 113,500 children, the court has determined that this child can never go home again and legally severs parental rights from this child, as if that child had never had those parents. Now, imagine that layer of trauma for a child, no matter what they've experienced. And this is physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. It's all of those areas that bring children into care, but they identify with their family of origin. And so the trauma that they've experienced through whatever abuse that's been defined by the court, and then the trauma of separation, and then the trauma of moving into a home that may not be a kinship relationship, it may be a stranger to them, and then multiple moves among homes because the systems just aren't set up well to make sure that the first home a child goes into stays in that home. We've got a lot of kids who experience a lot of negative impact on their lives through no fault of their own. But that big arrow over to the 20,000 is where the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption really wants to spend their time. Because every year, for the past couple of decades, year over year over year over year, more than 20,000 of these children who have been freed for adoption, the court has said, Agency X, it is your job to find a new family for this child. For 20,000 of these children, we failed. And these are children who age out of foster care. They turn 18 or they 21, and they leave foster care without the family that we promised them. And we know what happens to children who age out of foster care. And I want to put a huge umbrella over this and say, not because they're bad kids, not because they deserve this, not because they happen to land in the juvenile detention center because of some behaviors. None of that is a reason for negative outcomes. That's the impact of having been in the system as children. 1 in 5 will be homeless the year after they age out of foster care, 1 in 5. And those are the kids that we know about. There are a lot of kids that are couch surfing. Or 63% of survivors of trafficking in this country had some contact with the foster care system. They move in and out of situations because we ask them to figure out how to become an adult on their own. And there's a lot of talk about aging out services, and there's a lot of talk about how do we support kids who age out. The reality is we can support and support and support, but unless we have a family for a child, then we're not doing them right. Only 50% of these children will be employed at age 24. Less than 3% will earn a college degree, when I believe the national average is about 16%, it may be higher than that. 70% of females who age out of the foster care system will be pregnant by age 21. In and of itself, that's not bad. But when you don't have a system of support around you, it can be very challenging. 1 in 4 will experience post-traumatic stress disorder, which is at a much higher rate than returning war veterans because of what they've experienced. They will continue to have these unaddressed issues of grief and loss and trauma that manifests into their system and into their future. And if we can't think about the moral responsibility of providing a family for a child, then I know among all of you here, as we care about community activity, the cost per child, the cost of unemployment, the cost of undereducation, the cost of single parenting, the cost of incarceration, all of those potential negative impacts tallies into about $300,000 per youth in the community in which they age out. So it is a significant issue. So what do we do in response? We've got a lot of signature programs. We're going to talk about Wendy's Wonderful Kids in a second. We were the lead founders and funders of National Adoption Day, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, which gives the community simply a chance to celebrate adoptions of all kinds, international, infant, foster care, but it makes normal this conversation. I did a little interview with local news stations before this. That's what we do on National Adoption Day. Just get out the normalcy of this, that adopting from foster care is something we can all do, and here's the Smith family that did it, and you can do it too. Awareness materials we make free of charge. We send out tens of thousands of beginner's guide to adoption, all kinds of support materials to agencies and to individuals to make sure they have access to resources, and we refer them to other organizations that we know. The one thing that I wanted to talk about for just a second is the adoption-friendly workplace with this room. Dave Thomas, one of his legacy programs when he was a CEO, he called up his favorite CEOs and said, hey, do you provide adoption benefits for your employees? And most of them said, no, what are you talking about? And he said, well, if you provide birth benefits for families that are formed through birth, why the heck aren't you providing benefits for families that are formed through adoption? Paid leave, financial support, recognition that families are formed in multiple ways. And so started this campaign that we now have today, the 100 Best Adoption-Friendly Workplaces, where employers can tell us what benefits they have and we rank them. But more important than that, we give the tools and resources to say, you know, when an employee is making a decision between two organizations, if one has a robust adoption benefits in their HR package and one does not, we know from our employers that they will choose that package if everything else is the same. So it just helps with employee loyalty. It makes a business known as family friendly. And frankly, it's a low cost because less than 0.1% of employees participate in adoption benefits. So something to think about. We've got all kinds of materials on the website. If your organization is not adoption friendly, we can help you get there. And then national grant making. As a national nonprofit public charity, the dollars that we bring in, we want to send out. And so last year we sent out about $24 million worth in grants to organizations, large and small, public and private, across the nation to implement. A lot of it went to the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program that we're going to talk about, but a lot to other national grants as well. So Wendy's Wonderful Kids. And I know I'm probably getting close to time, so I need to start talking quicker. Okay. In about 2002, 2003, we heard this number of 20,000 kids aging out of care year after year after year, and we were doing a great job. We still had the residual from Dave Thomas and his persona that helped us, and we had the Wendy's brand that helped us engage in this conversation, and we're wholly independent from the Wendy's company, but we had this brand that helped us do this conversation, but realized we had to move from talk to action. We couldn't just say, yeah, 20,000 children aged out of foster care every year, and oh yeah, there's an overrepresentation of Black and Hispanic children in the foster care system, and then not do anything about it. So we began to look at where were the emerging best practices for those kids most at risk of aging out of foster care. And by that I mean this focused population of children. Children age 9 and older. How many of you, if you're thinking about adopting, immediately think, I'd like a sibling group of 2, one is 14 and one is 9, let's go. You know, typically you're entering the door thinking about an infant, you're not thinking about a group. But these are the kids that will age out of foster care. Sibling groups, children age 9 and older, children with special needs. Children who are opposed to adoption. When a judge says, do you want to be adopted to a 17-year-old? They say, no, thank you. I want to get out of this system, I'll be fine. Some of that's that executive decision making of an adolescent, right? Independence, defiance, that's just normal. But add to that layers of trauma and it turns into, I'll be fine on my own and I don't need an adult, and P.S., I don't need a family. Children who've been lingering in care 5, 6, 7 years, and children without an identified adoptive resource. So we created a model that was really just good social work, and we said, here's what we'll do. We'll use our grant making to send out to agencies, and I think Adopt America Network was one of our first way back when. We started a pilot project in 2004 and said, we'll give you a grant to hire a full-time adoption professional who will implement this model. And if this model works for this population of children better than business as usual, then we'll begin to grow it. And we went to our Wendy's friends, our franchisees' friends, and said, can you help us raise some dollars so that we can have more money to send a grant out averaging about $75,000 to hire a full-time adoption professional. Implemented in 6 sites across the nation in 2004. By 2007, we had a footprint in all 50 states, and we began to see that it was working, that the numbers were rising, that the most vulnerable, the most forgotten, the most neglected children were getting adopted. And so we implemented a rigorous evaluation from 2007 to 2011, a randomized control evaluation comparing children served by this. It's called a child-focused recruitment model. We branded it Wendy's Wonderful Kids because our Wendy's friends stepped in a big way. What we compared was children served by this model in a specific community against children served by business as usual. And at that time, business as usual was pretty much public displays of children, websites with their faces saying, hey, if you want to adopt me, I'm available. And what we found in 2011 was that children on average were about 2 times more likely to be adopted. And again, this focused population of children, not the general population. And older children were up to 3 times more likely to be adopted. And children with particular mental health needs were more than 3 times more likely to be adopted. Significant numbers in child welfare. And that put us on a journey of saying, we now need to take this program to scale. And so we began looking at a different relationship. We can generate as much philanthropy as possible, but we can't take over the child welfare system for this population of children. So we began to look at what would public-private partnerships look like, and went to our home state of Ohio in 2012 and said, can we work out a relationship? Well, we'll continue to fund whatever our baseline was, and at that time we were funding 7 recruiters across the state of Ohio. But will you, Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, step in and help fund so we can take this program to scale? So we can embed now this evidence-based program in the state of Ohio with enough recruiters to service the population that deserves this intervention. And they said yes. And they've been with us since 2012. And that helped us then march across the nation and begin to have conversations with other states. So since to date, we now have 518 of these recruiters, really an army of recruiters across the nation working on behalf of the most vulnerable children. 17 states and 1 province has been scaled. We've got 5 more conversations with states pending, and 13,557 children have had their adoptions finalized. And when you look at the demographics of these children, that's how we know the program's working. The average age of a child served by Wendy's Wonderful Kids is 14. 77% are in sibling groups. 79% have one clinically identified special need. 88% have had no efforts on their behalf. They've simply sat in foster care. They've had no efforts on their behalf looking at how do we get this child adopted. And 21%, this is the one that still drives me crazy, 21% of the children before the Wendy's Wonderful Kids caseload had already had a failed adoption. They'd been adopted and their family gave them back. Yeah. But we're really proud about Ohio. We have 83 recruiters across the state of Ohio, have finalized 1,500 adoptions. We're nearing 2,000 actually. Average age is 13, same kind of statistics. And we're super proud in Toledo and surrounding area. We're funding 10 through Adopt America Network and 1 in an outside agency. They're carrying a caseload now of about 140 children, I believe. And they've probably, I didn't look this one up, apologies, but I think they've probably finalized more than 200 adoptions. So congratulations to Ohio and specifically to Toledo for your work on this. Okay, I'm gonna go back. So I have wrapped, hopefully that up fairly quickly. I wanna show just a quick video of the power of love.
So when Dawson and Dalton came here, they didn't really know what the words I love you meant. And after a few months, I sat there with them and I said, Dawson, do you know what I mean when I say I love you? No, not really, Mom. So I told him, I said, you know, when I say I love you, I mean with every ounce of me and with every breath in me. There is nothing I won't do for you, and I will protect you against anyone and everyone for the rest of my life. And he sat there and he looked at me and said, wow, I know, huh? It is a pretty big wow. That's how much I love you. A couple weeks later, I was waking Dawson up to go to summer camp. And Dawson opened his eyes and looked at me. He said, I love you, Mom.
The backstory of those two is they were in care a number of years. Dawson's the younger of the sibling group, and he had to take care of his brother frequently. when his brother was very small. So it wasn't until, and he did not want to get adopted if they were going to be separated. And he said, nope, unless we're together, I'm not going to be adopted. And as a very young man, he said that. They found the perfect family, and you see that they're thriving. Look, it can feel overwhelming, I know it. T.S. Eliot, in one of his famous poems, said, home is where one starts from. I do a lot of traveling across the United States and Canada, and so I love when I travel. Getting on the airplane is when I'm not really ready for another conversation. So I'm the one that puts my earbuds in fairly quickly and goes to my home playlist, because I want to be at home. I want to go home. At the end of the day, I want to be where I'm loved and supported and cared for, and someone says, how was your day? And at the top of my playlist, I think now, is Michael Bublé crooning, I want to go home, let me go home. I'm also an old movie fanatic, and inevitably, if you're moving through Turner Classic Movies or whatever, you know what comes up, The Wizard of Oz, right? And it terrified me as a child. It's still kind of scary. I don't know, it's still kind of scary. But there's nothing like when she clicks those ruby red slippers, and almost as if in a prayer, she says, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. Look, home is woven into the heart and soul of who we are, home and family. It's woven into music. I came in last night and spent from 4 to 5 at the Toledo Museum of Art. Loved it. But you know, home, family, it's woven in art, in music, and literature. It's woven into who we are as humans. But that we deny that to 20,000 children year over year over year in this country and millions across the globe simply is no longer acceptable, I know, to all of us. And so there's something that we can do. No effort on behalf of a child is too small. You can share this with folks, you can talk about it in your community, but it's about learning and asking the difficult questions, about advocating, about volunteering, about mentoring, about fostering, about supporting, and ultimately about adopting if you can. But for all that you do, and for the service that you do, thank you. And for having me here today to chat with you in a warm and loving audience, I am truly grateful. Thank you.
Rita, thank you. We do have a few minutes, so if there's just a few questions out there, we can open up.
Thank you so much for coming today. I just had a quick question. As someone who I watched friends of mine attempt to adopt children out of the foster system, but who felt wholly unprepared for the amount of trauma that these children had faced in their time before they were in the system and possibly during the system as well. What sort of support services do you offer families who are willing to adopt older children out of the system in order so that they understand how to take care or tackle that trauma and best aid a child in their transition?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are 2 levels. The first level is the recruiters, the 518 recruiters across the nation. They're not our employees. We give grants to organizations to hire them as employees, but they go through rigorous, consistent training from the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. So part of that is training the recruiters to make sure they work with the social workers in their organization on where the support service is available for these families before that adoption is finalized, if at all possible. Second level is we've just finished a 3-year strategic plan, and part of that plan is a gap that we've had for a long time, and we've now added post-adoption services to what we will begin to develop. I don't think we're going to create new programs, but we're going to look at where are the existing best practices in post-adoption supports in agencies that we currently fund with Wendy's Wonderful Kids Recruiters, and then how do we meld those post-adoption services with those kids who've been adopted. And again, Adopt America Network is one of the 3 sites across the nation that we're funding, one in Colorado, one in Ohio, and one in New York, in order to test and see what's best out there. Where can we amplify and elevate? Where can we potentially replicate? We're just at the beginning of that, because we've done it on an ad hoc basis through our national grant-making program, but now we're making it a strategic pillar in the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. But it's tough. There is, particularly in rural, and well, whether it's rural or urban, there is a lack of consistent, evidence-based post-adoption resources for families, and they can feel overwhelmed. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I, for one, have no idea what happens the first week that a child goes into this vacuum that they have no idea what they're getting into. Could you explain to us who greets them, who gets them on their feet when they're scared to death, I would assume, and how that all works?
And the unfortunate answer to that, it depends on the agency, depends on the county, depends on the state. But ideally, let's say that a social worker comes to the home of a child and has to remove that child from the home. They will then take them to a center at their agency where they'll be essentially processed. Hopefully some kind of medical and review will be taken so they know what's going on. But meanwhile, they're looking for a place for that child. They should be looking for an extended family member for that child. But frequently, because things happen so relatively quickly sometimes, they can't find that family member, and so they'll go to this queue of waiting foster parents, many of whom say, I'll take an emergency placement. And so frequently these children go into an emergency placement, but it's not a long-term placement. So they may be there for a week or two until they can find a longer-term placement or a kin placement. It's horrible. It's horrible. Particularly if police are involved, the children think I did something wrong. That's just their natural response to police. And particularly if the police aren't trained well enough to understand what they're experiencing. Sometimes it's overburdened, and I'm not dissing the system at all. We have, in many states, a 50% turnover of child welfare workers right now. And so we're constantly recharging and renewing and retraining beginners into this system. So it may be someone that's very young or very new to the conversation and hasn't had time to learn what to do and how to do it. So I'd like to say in some jurisdictions they do it much better. They may take them to a center where they surround them with support services and they surround the family with support services, but I'm afraid to say that's not the norm.
Hi, Rita. Hey. I want to very publicly thank Rita and the Dave Thomas Foundation for all the support that's come to our community through the work that we're doing at Adopt America. We couldn't do it without the support that has come. And this woman has done an amazing job of taking the need for adoption for kids from foster care across the country and has made it much more likely that kids are getting adopted. So, a lot of that is right back to Rita for all the work that she's been doing. And we are so grateful because the programs are working here in Toledo and in Northwest Ohio. And so thank you, Rita, for all of that on behalf of this community.
Of course, thank you for your work. Thank you.
Rita, thank you so much. I think the gravity of the work that you're performing is obvious, and the gratitude is obvious. And I, for one, just thank you so very much for everything you all do. As a token of our appreciation, we'd like to present you with Historical Tales of Toledo, which was written by one of our past presidents, Clint Mock. We will also be making a donation in your name to the Polio Plus campaign to eradicate polio from the face of the earth. So thank you so much. Okay, next week on October 2nd, we will be led by Mr. Jim Lehman, who will be your director of the foundation. They will tomorrow, God, I can't talk today. It is Foundation Day next week. Come hear everything that's going on with the foundation and everything and all the impact we're making in the community. There are 3 committee meetings this afternoon. Community Services is in Summit A. Youth Services in Summit B, and Peace will be meeting in Summit C. Go out this week, create hope in the world, carry the energy that this room has, and just keep doing everything you guys are doing. Everything's going great. Keep it up. See you next week. We're adjourned.